Hi, my name is Matthew Studebaker, and I am a professional bird and wildlife photography tour leader. And today I wanted to talk to you about our Florida trip. Florida is well renowned in the nature photography community for having an abundance of subject matter. You can probably Google some of the best places to go and walk away with a lot of good images. It's just incredibly productive, and the birds tend to be relatively tame. So one of my goals when I put this trip together originally was to add value. I wanted to take you to places that you normally wouldn't know to go, places that have taken me over a decade to find and perfect, as well as show some unusual birds or rare birds that you wouldn't normally just discover on your own. So I want to get a good balance between rare species, unique opportunities, and just good images. We start off the trip on the East Coast, where we are looking for several target species and then end up picking up a bunch of other things along the way. That's kind of how I build my trips, is we're hoping for this. This is the hard thing where we have to spend extra effort. And while we're out there looking for that thing, we usually see a whole bunch of other things, and we photograph opportunistically based on what looks like it would make a good image. So the kind of key target things we're looking for are spoonbills gathering nesting material. There's a place where I can actually cut branches, sometimes like some flowering branches or whatever looks attractive, put them out for the spoonbills, and they'll actually fly right in and grab them in front of us. Sometimes they'll play tug of war with the branches. It's really amazing. It's a site that's been developing over the last several years and getting better and better with each year. And that particular behavior is fairly recent and just phenomenal. Along with the spoonbills at that location, there's a variety of other wading birds displaying great egrets and hingas. Sometimes we get owls. There's usually some snail kites around. Near the area where the spoonbills nest, there's a fairly large area with dry palmetto and longleaf pine forest. And in that area, we can often find owls. Brown-headed nuthatch is a great find, Bachman sparrow. But we wouldn't pass up like a good northern parula singing in some Spanish moss or something. So it's always a good time around there. Limpkin, if we can call a limpkin over, that'd be really good. And then the other half of day number one, we go to the coast and photograph shorebirds, as well as, if the conditions allow, ospreys diving for fish. Also in that area, there's some darker forest hammocks that harbor wintering passerine. So it's a really nice mix on day one. On the second day of our Florida trip, we do something really fun, and we look for Florida scrub jay, which is an endemic species to Florida. But there are some family groups that have become ridiculously tame. I mean, you can just walk into their area and they will literally, usually one of the biggest difficulties with this shoot is getting them somewhere that's not on you. It's pretty amazing and it's really fun. But they're beautiful and they're unique to Florida, and it's taken me a while to find the way to like reliably just nail them, but I usually, knock on wood, we can get them. And after that, we drive to the center part of the state where we spend the rest of the trip. On the rest of the trip, each day we do one outing on airboats, and they are just so much fun. I mean, the trip is about the product of getting a good bird image, but it's also about enjoying the process. And I mean, the airboats are just so fun. I had originally assumed that I had to get a pontoon boat because I thought an airboat, while it can get in there, would just scare them away. But while I was on the pontoon, I watched airboat after airboat just go right next to these snail kites. So one day I went to an airboat captain and I said, "Hey, do you know what snail kites are?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you think you could get me close to one?" And he said, "Yeah." And so then I took out my lens and I'm like, "You see this lens? It looks huge. It looks like it's probably the Hubble Space Telescope, but actually doesn't. You still have to be pretty close." And I showed him how close I would have to be to the snail kite. And he said, "Tell you what, if I don't get you snail kite within 5 minutes, frame filling, money back." And I was like, "All right, you have a deal, sir." So I went out with him and he did. I mean, right away, he knew where they were and how to get close. We approach with the airboat fan on, which is very loud, and we actually have to wear head protection. But after we are kind of getting close to the area, or in an area where we think that they're concentrating in to hunt, we cut off the motor and just drift into position. And the birds are just used to hearing that obnoxious noise, and they tolerate it. In fact, I think they are probably more likely to tolerate us on the airboat than if we were just walking around the shore or something like that. So it's a really amazing experience, especially because the airboats can just go on, they can even go on ground, but they just you feel like you're floating over the marsh, and it's incredible. And while we're looking for the key snail kite shots, which would be, hovering, coming down with their claws out, maybe scooping a snail out of the marsh, maybe putting it on a branch and eating it, maybe carrying nesting material to their nests, because they usually are just starting to think about nesting at that time of year. In addition to that, we just find all kinds of things in the marsh that would usually be pretty difficult to access from shore. Anything from purple gallinules, that's a big target there as well. We try to get them as they skid across the water. A lot of times we'll find a narrow channel where they want to go across, and try to get them in flight as they rush across. And it's a really fun challenge. The gray-headed swamp hens are becoming more and more prevalent there, and we don't really want them there, but they're pretty, so we photograph them. It's still fun. Along with basically every marsh bird in Florida, you can find in these dense marshes in the middle of the state. American and least bittern are targets. Limpkin, sandhill cranes, hopefully with babies. We got to stop for an alligator. We usually can find the airboat captains, rather, not me. The airboat captains often have a good handle on where alligator nests are, because that's what normally most tourists would want to see. Most tourists aren't going to them asking for least bittern; they're asking to see gators. So they have a good handle on that, and we'll look at that. So it's just an amazing mix on the marsh, and we do one airboat ride per day. We don't do them all on the same lake, because some years one lake is slower or one lake is just amazing. So do at least 2 different lakes to kind of get a nice mix. And even if the species are the same, a lot of times the vegetation is a little different, but it gives us some nice variety. So 4 sessions on airboats, and that's included in the price of the trip. When we're not doing airboats, we are looking for several different habitats. One of my favorite is the longleaf pine forest in the center of the state. They are home to the endangered red cockaded woodpecker. So that's a target that kind of gets us out there. And then while we're looking for those, we can typically find Bachman sparrow, brown-headed nuthatch, barred owls, great horned owls. That's also a big favorite of mine, and usually people who take the trip, is trying to find owls in like Spanish moss. It can just be really beautiful down there. Or red-headed woodpeckers, pileated woodpeckers. The huge oaks just expand. They're wider than they are tall in that part of the state, and they're just draped with this beautiful moss, and it makes for some really beautiful images. Along with the longleaf pine forest, we also go into some dry areas looking for caracara, meadowlark, and some others. But as a whole, we end up finishing the trip looking for several endangered species, some key species that are probably difficult to do on your own. I started going down to Florida in 2005, and I spent most of the winter there in 2006. And I've spent a good amount of time every year since. And it seems like every time I go down there, I learn a few new tricks and have kind of perfected this thing. And my Central Florida trip is something I'm really quite proud of. And if there's a spot on the trip this year, I would love to have you.